It had to happen. We're going to have that conversation about using cable cameras. Some call it, I think, a spider cam, and also drones in a church service. It happens. It's happening in some big churches out there. And I think we just need to have a constructive conversation about, does it work? Does it not work? Is it distracting? What's the story? Stay tuned. We're going to talk about it. You know, it had to happen because sometimes technology exceeds our strategy. That means sometimes technology comes through with amazing breakthroughs that are so interesting, we start using them whether we should or not. And that's not the discussion here so much the should or not, but at least we're going to have an open-ended discussion about when it comes to things like cable cameras or drones, particularly in a church service. Now, I'm a television director. I've directed multi-camera programs for years and years. I've done 16 camera shows. I've directed basketball and boxing and all kind of stuff for sports channels and networks like ESPN. I've shot concerts all over the place. And so I understand a little bit about this, and I've directed programs inside church sanctuaries for longer than some of you media directors have been alive. And I've seen a lot of change that have happened. I remember when we brought jib arms in. In those days, they were cranes. You know, the old Fisher crane was the big original crane that you could never buy. You had to rent forever. And it was huge. And I understand people's trepidation in bringing a crane into a church service. We had people that freaked out. And then, you know, technology advanced and they became jib arms, and they were thinner and smaller and lighter, and you could do extensions and you could pull them back if you needed to. And there was a lot more flexibility, and they were less noticeable. But still, in many churches around the country who have not experienced it, a jib arm is still a little bit of a distracting thing. And so church media directors are starting to look at, well, maybe I should use a cable camera, you know, the kind of camera you see at a football game stretched across the stadium. So I think one of the brand names is Spider Cam. And there are other brand names. There are other kinds out there as well. And so we're using them because, you know, media directors, is their job to try to capture the service in a unique way that's meaningful to people. And so I applaud people giving it a shot. Let's give it a shot and see what we can do. And in many cases, I know the thinking has been a jib arm was a little bit distracting because it's a big arm thing out there. And with something like a cable camera or a drone, you can make it disappear. You could pull it up. You can pull it back so that people don't notice it quite as much. So the theory is a cable camera or a drone is a little less obvious than a jib arm. Well, let's talk about that because I think it's time we had a hard conversation about it because we really do need to. And I've had experiences with churches that did all these things. And I can tell you a little bit about those experiences. But here's the thing. A jib arm can be distracting. A big part of that distraction is the operator. Is if he's not using it or she is not using it well, that operator is going to be distracting. It's going to be terribly distracting. If they're whipping it around, if they're, zinging right over the heads of people in the congregation, it can not only be distracting, it can be scary, and it can be relatively unsafe. So I say, before we get rid of a jib arm, let's talk to the operator and see what we could do to make it less, what's the word I'm looking for? You don't want it to be overbearing in the service. You want it to be subtle. You want to be kind of behind the scenes as much as possible. And I'm a big jib arm advocate. I think that jib arms separate the men from the boys. And when it comes to a video or the women from the girls, it's just, it's a whole level of professionalism, particularly when it comes to music. Sermons, teaching somewhat, but music, they're just amazing. I love them. And if you're doing a worship concert or an event, I don't know if I'd want to do a worship event or a concert without a jib arm of some kind, maybe multiple jib arms, depending on the size of the room and the number of people in the room or the congregation. You might want multiple because it's so effective. But let's talk about the fact that they can be distracting. Then we try a cable camera. Now, here's the problem with the cable camera. And in my experience, and I've worked with a couple churches that have tried it, it's just because it's everywhere, it's more distracting than ever. And again, a discerning operator can make the difference between life and death, but I would be very, very careful about a cable camera. If you have stadium style seating, in other words, if the back of the congregation goes up, chances are, even if the camera is up and out of the way, the cables are going to cross the video screen, the IMAX screen. So we have to think about that. A similar thing with a drone. Drones can go everywhere. So chances are most operators are going to make them go everywhere. I remember when Ampex came out with flying boxes, they had a machine called was it an ADO? I think it was an ADO that you could control, put a picture in a picture and then fly that box around. Let me tell you, people flew boxes around for the next year in every show there ever was produced for television. Every opening, every commercial had a flying box flying around it. They used that ADO, they wore it out. And the tendency is for all creative people, they get something new. Well, let's use it. Let's figure it out. I mean, drones are already way overused in most movies and certainly short films and commercials. I shouldn't say overused now because we're coming down. For the last couple of years, they've been so overused. Every short film, particularly every ministry wants to take their drone to Africa, and then suddenly everything is from a bird's eye view. Let me tell you, let's get down where the people are. Let's interview people. Let's get close-ups of the action. Let's not just fly the drone around all day long. And now I'm sensing that we're starting to cut back on that, and drones are finding their proper place in a transitional scene or an introductory scene or an overview or something epic. That's when they're used, and that's a lot better than just flying them around all the time. So, but I'll tell you a couple of experiences. I was in a Christmas service in one church that they used a drone. And I'm sure the shot was amazing. I was in the audience. I wasn't working with them. I was just visiting the church that Sunday. And I'm sure, so it gave me a good perspective. I'm sure the shot was probably amazing, but the minute people started hearing that little zzz, sound, they started looking up. And I don't know the drone that's perfectly quiet. Maybe there is one, but this one wasn't. And it wasn't loud, but it was just you just heard a slight little reverberation of those blades. And the minute they did, they started looking up. People started pointing at it. And at one point, I would say this was maybe 2,000 people in this service. It was a joint Christmas service. I would say at one point, at least a third of the congregation during this intensive, slow, passionate praise and worship song. It was a beautiful, beautiful song. But during that moment, at least half of that congregation was looking up, pointing at the drone. And it was the most distracting experience I've ever felt, short of a couple of weirdos running down the aisle of the church or doing something crazy. But it was just insanely distracting. And I just thought at that moment, is this really worth destroying the intimacy of this worship experience to get what is probably a cool shot, but is it worth it? I remember a quote from a great film director. I think it was John Huston, who said, the minute the audience notices how cool your camera shot is, you failed as a director because you've distracted them from the story. Now let's repeat that again for you young adventurous directors out there. The minute someone in the audience thinks that shot is really cool, you failed as a director because you've distracted them from the story. The whole point of directing a church service or a worship event or a concert, whatever it is to get the audience, get the congregation, the audience into that moment, is to make them part of the story. And the minute you do something so amazing, so creative, so brilliant that you've distracted them from that story, you failed as a director. You simply failed. So I just say this, use it for the right purposes. Maybe it's an opening, the outside of the church as people are coming in. Maybe it's during and here's the thing. If it's a church that's all 20-something people and it's a worship event or something, fine, give it a shot because they're more used to it. They're more likely to, give you a little creative, leeway. I think very often, even most churches are going to have a lot of older people and middle-aged people and younger people. And the truth is, if they're not used to seeing it, it's just going to be distracting for a very, very long time. It's going to be really awkward. So all that to say, if you're a director, a creative person, a media director at a church or ministry, really, really think this out. Think it out. Yes, a jib arm can be distracting, but if it's operated well, at least it stays in one place. People kind of zone it out if you've got it in a good spot and people are used to it. What I do very often is in a new church setting, if I'm going to introduce a jib arm to a new church or ministry setting, what I'll often do is bring it in with the shortest arm possible. So it almost just looks like a normal camera with an extended little arm, and the camera's out there, just a few feet, maybe a couple feet at the most. And then the next Sunday, extended another foot. The next Sunday, extended another foot. People start warming up to it, and they start liking it, and they start feeling more comfortable with it. So audiences just need, particularly a church congregation. Remember, this is not a Taylor Swift audience. This is a church congregation. They're coming in here not to be wowed by technology. They're coming in here to experience God. And so anything that distracts them from that is worth rethinking. So as I said at the beginning, I love technology and I'm always happy to give technology a whirl. But I think what the discerning directors, the discerning creatives need to think about is, how is that helping our viewer, our audience, our congregation? How is it helping them reach the goal of experiencing God? If it's helping, great. If we're just trying to get some cool stuff, I'm not sure that's our goal. So this is a short little episode. I thought it was time to discuss these things because we're going to start seeing drones in church. I've seen a couple balloon drones. At least they were quiet, but they're bigger. So they're even more distracting. We're going to start seeing drones in church services. We're going to start seeing cable cameras in church services. And I just say, before we spend all that money and all that effort to try to rig them and put them together and put them into a service and alienate people, let's sit down and think about, how is that helping us achieve our goal? And I would even do that with a jib arm. I'm not saying a jib arm is sacred by any means. Anything. Now, there's that deal where there's a dolly track that you mount on the wall in the back of the service. I've seen those in a number of studios and a couple churches where the camera can, is on an electronic dolly that can go back and forth, behind everybody. It's on the wall, so it goes on behind them. Maybe that's better because it doesn't distract people because they can't see it. It's behind their head. It doesn't make a lot of noise. I don't think it makes any noise, and it's behind their head. So just think of and it doesn't get the shots that a drone or a cable camera can get, or a jib arm. But let's just think about what the technology could do to help us enhance a worship space. I think, I don't want to be critical here, but I think I was this way when I was young. I was thinking about my directing career. I was thinking about, what could I do that will be so amazing with these cameras that will make people realize I'm a talented director. And I wasn't thinking nearly enough about how I can make this a more intimate worship space for the people that are here, as well as the people that are watching on video or watching on television or watching on the live stream. Remember, everything we do as a director, everything we do as a creative people should be focused on enhancing the experience of the people in the room or the people watching on television. How can you do that? When you figure that out, then you're moving forward and doing something powerful and effective. So until then, cable cameras, drones, even jib arms, let's be very careful and sensitive how we use those, if we use them at all, because I think that's a question and a conversation we need to be having. Thanks for watching. I think we should do more of these discussions because there's so much when it comes to being a media director at a church or a ministry organization. There's so much that I think we need to talk about, that we need to think about, and maybe we should start doing more of these topics on this podcast. And maybe I'll start bringing on some of the people that are trying these things out and using them and sharing their experience about whether it's working, whether it's not, what they could do differently. Stay tuned. Keep coming back to these podcasts because we're going to have some interesting topics this coming year. Thanks for tuning in. Check me out on my blog at philcooke.com, and we'll see you next time.